Is this about our numbers, Dini? Should we wait a little bit longer? Good to go?
Yeah, I think we can get started.
All right. Well, aloha kākou o Mikiala Ng ko uinoa no wailua o ahu maiau. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Mikiala Ng. I'm from Wailua Oahu, and I am so excited to be moderating today's event. Amongst many, many other things, I am part Native Hawaiian and part Japanese, and I'm so excited to be moderating this discussion with Kumu Val Kalei Kanuha. I mean, it's discussion sounds so formal. We're just talking story. You might hear me saying the word kumu, and that's just in Hawaiian, kumu means teacher. And so we'll use it the same way that you'd use like professor or, you know, so instead of saying Professor Kanuha, you'll hear me saying like kumu Kanuha. Anyways, I just like to start by introducing kumu Kanuha. She is a professor, or she is the assistant dean for diversity, equity, and inclusions, as well as a teaching professor at the University of Washington School of Social Work. And she is part Native Hawaiian, part Japanese. So normally I give you a big hug and a lei, but we can't really do that over Zoom. So I'm just sending my aloha virtually.
I feel it.
Let's to start off the discussion today, Kumu Kanuha, could you tell us a bit more about your roots and upbringing in Hawaii?
Sure. So first of all, mahalo, kekua, mahalo, naumakua, mahalo, na kupuna. I'm so honored to be here today with all of you in this virtual space and place. It seems so odd to be in community with everyone in this way now. I mean, I think as Mikiala said, it's not natural for us in our culture, and I'm sure it isn't for most of us, right? And so to not be able to be hialo, which means face to face, is it's a little acultural, I would have to say, but we're all going to do our best. And I'm so honored and pleased to be with all of you here today, and especially to be able to share a little bit about my life trajectory and pathway. And I'm very open to just taking Q&A, especially because we're such a small group. We can actually talk story together instead of having anything too formal. But you know, we'll see where we end up. So in terms of my background, first of all, how many of you have ever been to Hawaii? Besides Mikiala, at least. Okay, good. You know, it's funny because now, I mean, I've lived in New York and in the Twin Cities and now in Seattle. And, you know, a lot of people have been to Hawaii. It's far away from a lot of places. It actually, I don't know if people know this, it is the most geographically isolated place on the planet where there is human habitation. So, you know, the closest major land mass to Hawaii is the Americas. And to think, you know, that's 2,500 miles away. So it is very, very geographically isolated. And in some ways, the fact that so many people get there from however, wherever we come from is really kind of a miracle in a way. Or that we inhabited that place speaks to, I think, in terms of our roots, that our people were supposed to come there, and we settled there from the South Pacific of Polynesia. And so I was born in Hilo, Hawaii, which is on the island of Hawaii. We call it affectionately the Big Island, because it is the biggest island in the island chain. And so I grew up in the 50s, and I always want to kind of share that because, you know, now I have, I used to be kupuna in training. Kupuna means elder, but I think now I'm an elder. So, so I think I have elder status, and I think that really says a lot about how I see the world and how I've experienced the world, because I've been in this forum and in this on this planet for it'll be 70 years this summer. And so growing up in Hawaii at a time when it was in the 50s, and having grown up and come through those times when in some ways life was much simpler, very uncomplicated, and filled with, I think, some of the values and principles and things we believe in. All of us do, everywhere around the globe. But certainly for me, growing up as a part Hawaiian, I grew up still in a place that was deeply colonized, as it is even now. And so much of my upbringing was shrouded in this way of life, which was I lived in a very rural town. Um, we, everybody went out on their own. Like, I can't imagine now, like, we would ride our bikes at 7 years old, like miles away down some major road. And you just, to think of doing that now, you just wouldn't let your kids do that. But um, and it was just a time like that. If it was raining, you were walking home, some car would pull up and pick up all the kids who are walking and bring them all home. So it was very very much a rural way of life. And then growing up in Hawaii, which is one of the most diverse ethnic, racial places in the world, certainly in of the United States territories. Although I think for me, I still consider Hawaii an occupied nation of the United States. And so while I do claim my citizenship in the United States, I also claim my citizenship, my dual citizenship as a citizen of the independent sovereign nation of Hawaii. And so that's a whole nother story if people want to hear more about that. So having grown up in the 50s and then coming of age in the 70s in the liberation movements, kind of the mainstreaming of the civil rights movement, but really the birth of environmental justice, nuclear and nuclear-free movements. And I was part of the anti-Vietnam War movement, so peace and justice movements, and of course the women's movement, which had a very, very, very huge influence on me in that time. So these times and places and spaces in which I came up had a tremendous influence on my social justice inclination. And also being part Hawaiian and growing up at a time that was a simpler time, but it was also a very direct time where I grew up with people insulting my father because he was Hawaiian. And as with all Indigenous people, the ways that we were stereotyped and thought to be, all of us were underachievers, everybody was drunk, nobody worked, nobody finished school. And we were all stupid, so really the kind of the harbingers of early colonialism in Hawaii, all the things that people said about and still think about Indigenous people as being heathens and backward and dirty, and these were all things that I grew up hearing people say about me and my father. And now I don't think people will say that to your face, but they probably still think it. And so to have come through all of those movements and to have grown up in the time I did, I kind of have a forward and a backward look at the world. And I also am an idealist. And I think this is also part of my culture, which is to try to always be grounded in aloha, which is a sense of love and respect and caring for others. And I think that is what social justice is. True justice and our wanting and loving freedom and liberation and justice comes from a sense of love and wholeness and a love of humanity and a love of all things, animate and inanimate, things we can see, things we can't see, things we know, things we don't know. And so I'm really happy to have sustained that over all these years. And I think it's grounded in my deep relationship with my mother, who was second generation Nisei, generation Japanese American. She is the daughter, I am the granddaughter of a picture bride from Japan. And my father, who is mainly Native Hawaiian, Indigenous Hawaiian, and also a little bit of Spanish and Chinese. There are not that many pure-blooded Indigenous Hawaiians anymore. Most of us come from mixed breeds, but we are very close to our Hawaiian culture and heritage, and it resides within us each and every day in everything we do. So that's my beginning. And I just wanted to say that before my green screen, that was a big boo-boo, showed up, behind me are the mountains on the island of Hawaii, Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. And then I think in the far back is Hualalai. But this is a place of tremendous social movement going on right now in Hawaii, Kukia'i Mauna, which is the fight to prevent the building of the 30-meter telescope on these pristine mountains that already have 13 telescopes up there, co-owned by corporations and countries around the world, but really situated in the global economy of the United States. And so I put Mauna Kea up there to just remind us that the struggles for liberation and justice are still going on in Hawaii as it is everywhere else. So that's my opening. Mahalo.
Thank you, Kanuha, for sharing that. Just so much ike, so much knowledge and experience that you could talk about almost anything and it would be amazing.
Thank
Yeah. So I think one of the big questions I have for today's discussion is coming from such a unique and like such a rich background, and being all these different things and being in all these different places. What does it mean to be Indigenous in an academic or professional setting? And like, how does that, like inside in Hawaii or outside Hawaii, just, yeah.
Well, Mikiala, because I'm 70. I spent my first 20 years in Hawaii, my next 20 years in Minnesota, my next 20 years in Hawaii, and here I am in Seattle. So I spent over half my life in Hawaii, but I've spent half my life not in Hawaii. And so I think part of the issue of being an expatriate, I think for all of us, is it's filled with challenge, and it's filled with, there's a wanting to be away, and there's a wanting to always go home. And there's always that kind of that pain and of that tension inside of us of wanting, and I mean home, not necessarily home by place. For me, it is home as a place. I will go back to Hawaii someday. I hope that, wherever my spirit is, that it will always go back to Hawaii. When my time in this form and on this earth is over, that's where I want to be, is in Hawaii. But that's not true for everybody, right? But I think for many of us, home is place, and home is where our ancestors come from. It may not be our house. It may not be exactly where we grew up, but it's that place inside of our hearts and minds and bodies and spirits, however it is that we construct that. And so while, I'll say, to all of you, and to you especially, Mikiala, that I would say the first 15 years that I lived away from Hawaii, I dreamt every night. Every night that I had a dream I remembered, it took place someplace in Hawaii. And it was only when it stopped happening that I realized that I had been doing that all those years. And like, I'd be like studying at the library in Minneapolis, but it kind of looked like it was Hawaii. So every night I would have these dreams, and I thought I kind of thought it was kind of weird, but I think that was a way for me to keep my place and my ancestors alive in myself. And so I always say, so what I've learned from all of that is that all of you who love that place that you call home in your hearts and your bodies and your minds, that you really have to be intentional and mindful about keeping those spaces and those places alive in you, right? However it is that you need to do it, just do it wherever you are, because you know, that can never leave you. Even if you didn't even grow up in what you consider home, it's because it's in you. And so, you know, I mean, I know that like my partner is Iranian. She never grew up. She was born in Iran, but they moved, you know, when the Shah fell. And so, but she is deeply Iranian in her culture and her way of thinking about herself, even though she never lived there. So for her, that is who she is. She is an Iranian, even though she never lived there. So I think all of us need to find that space and that place in ourselves to keep those parts of us alive. And so how I do it is that way, you know, how I kind of navigate my life when I'm not in Hawaii, and for this time now that I'm in Washington State, I try to think about home. I play Hawaiian music, I eat food, I talk to my friends. I do whatever I can to just keep that part of me alive, even in the darkest of these rainy, cold winters here in Seattle. I think every day, like, so one of the goals I made for myself is whenever the sun came out, I don't care if it was 30 degrees, I would always go outside. So I said to myself, no matter what, if the sun came out, not if it wasn't sunny, but if the sun came out, that is so much how I grew up. So if the sun came out, I made a point to always go outside, even if it was like 5 minutes. Um, and so part of that was keeping that temperature and that place of Hawaii alive in me by doing that. So how I think about that for myself is to preserve and to protect and to create and to make intentional that remembrance of who I am and where I come from. So that's one thing. And then what that means for me as an academic, so the first thing I want to say is I never planned to have this career, I guess. Now it's been kind of a long time in academia, but it wasn't, I didn't know any professors except my teachers when I finally went to college. I didn't know personally anybody who was in academia. I didn't have any friends, neighbors, nobody, you know. So I never had any aspirations for higher ed as someplace I was going to be. And so this is what I'll tell you what happened for me. And so this is again the mindfulness, right? So what happened is after I went to get my PhD because I was kind of burnt out. I'd been practicing as a social worker for almost 20 years before I went back for my PhD. So I'm kind of unusual in that way that I practiced for a long time before I went back for my PhD. And I only did it because I didn't know what else to do and I was tired of practicing. And so it was so great. It was just exactly the rest I needed and a rejuvenation that I needed. So when I got to the end of that, I didn't really have any plans. And of course, you know, for many of you who are in academia, you know, this is much to the dismay of our advisors. If you say you don't know what you want to do with your degree, like people get kind of upset with you. If you have a PhD, even more so, right? What a waste of time and money. You don't even know what you want to do. Aren't you going to apply for jobs? And I kind of didn't. And then all of a sudden there was a job opening at the University of Hawaii and somebody let me know 3 days before it was closing. And I applied and everything moved very, very quickly. I actually got a job offer to come home on the second day of my visit. And for any of you who know about this is very unusual that you get a job offer when you go for a campus visit. But I got an offer even before I left. So this is what I did. I prayed on it. And I always cry when I tell this story because what I realized, and I had to talk to one of my Hawaiian elders that I met about 3 years after I moved back home, because I'd been gone for almost 25 years when I went back. And I said, you know, I don't know why. I didn't have any plans to come back to Hawaii. And you know what she said to me? She said, it wasn't your idea. It was our idea. We needed you to come home. And so that's why you're here. It really wasn't your choice. So that's another thing I think all of you need to be mindful and about and pay close attention, right? Which is sometimes what looks like a choice is not really a choice. Or if it looks like something's like, I don't know why I'm doing this wacky thing, but I guess I'm just gonna do it. And you don't have a rational explanation for it. So I think I went back home and I think I became an academic because this is what my ancestors wanted for me. And I think what they wanted is that I could be an exemplar, I could be a kumu to folks like you who may not have imagined that there could be a Hawaiian who would be an academic and a PhD, who would get tenure and who did pretty good, right? And so I feel like this is not my journey. It's a journey that my ancestors wanted for me. And as soon as I realized that, from that point on, everything I do, I know is not about me. It's about my ancestors before me, all of you that I'm in contact with now, and it's for all the generations to come. And you know, when you let go of your ego about who you are and how important you are and whether or not you have a lot of letters after your name, it'll be much clearer to you why you're doing what you're doing. And that you'll just have to trust that there is a path for you that is meant to be. And so I think I'm here in academia because it wasn't a calling of mine. I was called to it by others. That I truly believe that. And so I would say, you know, Mikiala, and for all of you, that for the times when you think, why am I doing this? You know, I hate academia, I hate, and you know, academia, I just have to say, is like, it's really screwed up. It's really, it is the most colonizing, oppressive institution. It's way worse than the police, honestly, because we think that we're better than everybody else. And so, you know, we can criticize the police, we can criticize the criminal legal system, we can criminalize the PIC, but nobody ever criminalizes higher ed. But there is so much about it that is deeply, deeply, it's archaic and it's deeply oppressive. And so I think maybe because I'm old and I don't care about tenure, because I got tenure a long time ago at Hawaii. And I gave up my tenure at Hawaii to come to UW because I think I was supposed to come here now. Right? And everybody's like, you gave up a full professor tenure job to get a contract job at the University of Washington? I said, I did that already. And I didn't need to do that, but I did it. And I knew now that I can do it. And so I don't need to do that anymore. So I have the luxury and the privilege of that now. But you have to be critical of the spaces that you're in. So that's the second thing I'll say. Be mindful of why you're doing what you're doing and really let your ego go about that. And I think this is especially true for any of us who are people of color, who are Native, who are queer, who are working class, who are immigrants. We are here for something much bigger than us. And so I hold on to that for everything that I've done ever since I went home 25 years ago. Now I live my life very differently without a sense of it being about me. And you know, when you do that, first of all, you feel so much better. The other thing is, you just realize that we all have such a bigger purpose in our lives. And when we remember that, it's so much more rewarding, because then it's not about what you failed to do or what great thing you did. It's about a calling that was made to you and you responded. And how much better it is to live our lives that way for something bigger than us. And it just makes me so much happier. So that's how I navigate it. I'm deeply critical. And but I was like this even when I started. Really, when I started, I was deeply critical. And there's so many stories I can tell you about, like not publishing my first article in like a top tier journal, and the dean had to call me in and say, "Why are you going to publish it there?" And you know what I said? I said, because a lot of practitioners who are doing AIDS work, they read that, but they're not going to read one of those academic journals. But not even academics read them. Why would I publish it there? I wrote that for the people, not to sit in some library where nobody's ever going to see it again. And she said, you know, you're not going to get tenure if you do things like that. And I said, then I won't get tenure. But this is a commitment that I have for my work to get to the people. And then I got tenure anyway, so there. um, so I just think, we just have to be deeply critical. And you're in an institution that is probably one of the bastions of oppression. And so I think, you just have to be critical. It's okay. You could be part of it and be critical. You really can. And so I think that's the tension, right? How you can keep your spirit and heart in one place and your foot and your aspirations in another place, always looking towards the future of what you hope the world to be. And that's kind of what you have to do. So you shouldn't quit going to school at Yale or any place else, but you should say, I want things to be different for everybody who's going to come after me in this institution. I hope that I'll remember that I did something different here in the time that I was here. So that's how I live the tensions and the contradictions.
That was Ike bombs, Kumu. Just so.
Well, that's a new phrase, Ike bombs. I gotta remember that one.
I heard that one a few years ago. Ike in Hawaiian means like knowledge. And so we'll be like, oh, Kumu, that was Ike bombs, like right there. Like that was just so much wisdom you dropped.
I like that.
No, but I'm in this anthropology intro to cultural anthropology class right now. And I just had that class right before this event. And there's me and one other Native student in that class. And we actually ended up in the same discussion section too. So we're always talking about like bringing Indigenous mindset to anthropology, and just we're always having dialogue and bringing things up in class, like we'll write stuff in the chat or say stuff to the professor. And because it feels like we're the only two Indigenous people there. And so on like the first week of class, we like made this little pact, like, you know what, me and you, like, we got this, like, we're gonna bring this Indigenous mindset to the table. And today in class was actually talking about this culture of harmony and like needing to, like, being pressured into not speaking up. And like, if you speak up, like, oh, you're not going to be a tenured professor, like you can't say that because you might get fired. And you were just speaking about that too, and you came out a tenured professor. So that was truly inspirational. I just came from that to right after this.
Well, and what I would say about that is, I mean, it's not going to make your life that much easier, right? But social justice work is not supposed to be easy. And so I always say that, I taught this class in Hawaii in sociology called Racism in Hawaii. Can you imagine a class like that? And the whole class, the whole course was about how racism is structured historically and institutionally in Hawaii, right? So I start from how we were before foreigners came. I talk about colonization. I talk about global capitalism. I talk about neoliberalism, but all of it is a big critique on pretty much white supremacy. And, half the class, it's an elective, but half the class are always white people who aren't from Hawaii, right? And everybody comes out of it like, and I would say, especially because it's an undergrad class, most students say, this should be a required class for any student who comes to the University of Hawaii, and then people who grew up there say, how come I didn't know these things? I lived here my whole life and I never even knew some of these things either. They don't teach us this in school. So it's the idea, right, that we have to be at places where we are going to confront things that are not right. And so I always say to students, if you come out of my class never having a moment where you felt mad at the kumu, or you were deeply in disagreement with anything that I said, or you didn't have more questions than you came in with, then I feel that I will have failed as a teacher. Because true ike, true critical thinking is accompanied always by discomfort, disagreement, anger. It's like, I don't like that, or I don't agree with that. That is really good because it means you're thinking, right? So I always say to people, I hope you come out disagreeing with some of the things that I say. And sometimes I actually plant things that I don't even believe, just to see if students are paying attention. You know, like I give readings that I don't even agree with, just to see if anybody says, I can't believe that Kumu gave us that article to read. It's like so offensive. It's like, good, you were paying attention. So that's what I really believe freedom and liberation is about. It's about really learning to become critical thinkers, reflectors, beings in the world, right? That you can always look at the other side of something. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, this means you're fully awake if you can see the wholeness in everything, which means like nothing is perfect, right? So there are positives and negatives, good sides, bad sides, and almost everything. And the more we allow ourselves to see the dark sides and the hard sides and the sides of life and the perspectives on life that are really painful and ugly and hard, it allows us to rejoice in the goodness and the resiliencies and the hope and the love that we have too. So I really feel like you can't really know love very deeply unless you also know the sides of love that can cause pain and hurt and harm and trauma, you know. And if you can't accept those things, then it's going to be hard to deeply love. Like I always say, like the people who are deeply in life are not afraid of death. It's only when you kind of are thinking, oh, I should have done that, I should have done this. Like, you know, like I know I'm going to probably be scared at the moment at which, you know, I'm about to be snuffed out. But I don't think I'll have any regrets, because every day I get up and I think, could I have done something else? Of course I could have, but I'm not going to fight to stay alive because I didn't do something. So I kind of feel like I've seen some very hard things in life, and I've seen so many beautiful things in life. And you got to see the hard things to appreciate the good things. I know it seems kind of Pollyanna-ish, but that's my principle of how I live my life.
Thank you for sharing that. Just so much is just like resonating just with me, and I'm sure the audience too. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you have any questions you want to ask Kumu Kalei, you can just turn on your mic and ask them, or you can send them in the chat. It's totally an open discussion. So we want to hear any of your thoughts or questions you have too, if anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, this is going to be like the Meghan and Harry interview, where all of you can be Oprah, which is you can ask me any question and I probably am going to answer it. So nothing is off the table in terms of your questions. So please feel free to ask anything at all.
I have a question. Sorry, I don't know if I want to. Well, anyway, mahalo, mahalo for
Hello,
being
Emily.
here. Nice to see you. I was just wondering if you could talk more about the sovereignty thing, and just kind of all of that. It's very interesting. I grew up here till I was 10, but moved away for a while, so I hadn't really heard about that movement so much until recently. I'm back in Hawaii now.
Great. Where are you living?
I'm in Kaimuki right now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It's good. Good to be back.
I bet.
I can see Diamond Head right out the window. It's very misty today.
Don't say that.
Sorry.
What are you interested in particular about sovereignty?
I don't know, just kind of like what the movement consists of, I guess, and like its base, like when and where it was created, and kind of what it consists of, I guess. Pretty much everything about it. I don't know a lot about it.
Well, you know, this used to be a big part of this class that I taught on racism in Hawaii, because I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say misunderstandings, but I think just generally there's a lot of confusion, I would say, about what sovereignty means in the context of Native Hawaiians, and so many different perspectives. And so I mean, I can send you all my PowerPoint on that. It's a little old, but I'll tell you this one. When people come out of that, they kind of, the people who thought that they knew exactly what Hawaiian sovereignty was realized that they didn't. Those who felt like they only thought one thing now think other things. Folks who really felt like Hawaiian sovereignty is the only way to go, understand the complexities of doing that in relation to the United States of America. And so there's just so many things about it. So do you go by Emily? Yeah, okay. So Emily, here are a couple, and everybody else, I'm just gonna give a couple of highlights about the issue of sovereignty in terms of Native Hawaiians in particular. So the place to always begin is that Hawaii was an independent sovereign nation. We were part of of almost every international council, tribunal. We were, along with France and Germany, Japan, other countries. Hawaii was a country, a sovereign country, like all the other countries that are more well known to everyone. And then and so at the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, basically what happened is that the United States of America waged a coup on the sovereign nation of Hawaii, led by white missionary descendants and industrialists who basically wanted to have Hawaii be a colonial state, and I don't mean like United States, a colonial entity of the United States, in order for industrialists and capitalists to be able to grow sugar there as a private industry. And so the United States government got in cahoots with these industrialists to overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy so that Hawaii would be free of tariffs. And so the industrialists could sell sugar internationally without having to pay tariff on it. So that's basically how the overthrow happened. And so if you kind of always remember that Hawaii was an independent sovereign nation, which makes Hawaii quite different than the tribal nations and of the United States, which is they were all sovereign too, but they didn't become a state of the United States, right? Most of the tribal nations have maintained their sovereignty. Now they have nation-to-nation relationships with the United States, which is actually very problematic for most of those tribal nations also. But Hawaii is very, very different in that way because we were an independent sovereign nation. Most of the tribal nations of the Americas did not have sovereign status in relation to other countries of the world. Hawaii did. So our situation is really, really different than other indigenous peoples. So that's part of what makes it complicated. So remembering that history is, I think, the most important thing, Emily and everybody to remember. And then since the annexation, the illegal annexation and occupation of Hawaii by the United States and their emissaries, and then the movement to Hawaii becoming a territory and then becoming a state in 1959, a state of the United States. This set in motion this trajectory of Hawaii being American, right? And a part of the United States. And so already the confluence of our sovereignty was kind of washed away. A part of it was not telling the truth of what happened and how it is that the United States took over Hawaii. And so so you have to place yourself in that historical perspective and that historical truth. And then everything since then, since the occupation of the United States in Hawaii, has resulted in these conversations, these dialogues, these voting initiatives to try to define what might Hawaiian sovereignty look like, right? But think about that. It's kind of like asking people who were colonized to like, okay, now imagine how you would be if you weren't colonized. I was like, I don't know what, right? So now we have all the descendants of the once colonized Hawaiian people who have known nothing else but their relationship to the United States as American citizens. So when you ask us, what would it mean to be sovereign again? It's like, I don't know, because we're not like Native Americans, we're not like tribal nations, we're not like Alaska Natives, we're not like anybody. But the only exemplars are those in the American context, right? So you can't even look at the Maori or any of the indigenous tribes of the South America, Central America, any of the indigenous peoples anywhere, because we are not the same, because we are part of the United States. So I think the tensions around what sovereignty is defined only within the models of sovereignty that the United States is willing to consider and the people of Hawaii are willing to consider. And so even among Hawaiians, so much infighting. What kind of sovereignty do we want? Nation to nation, state to nation, state to state, independent sovereignty, which most people, when you hear sovereignty, most people get scared that like, we're gonna like kick out all the Americans, right? And we're going to kick out anybody who's not Hawaiian. So that is one of the biggest misinformations about the sovereignty movement in Hawaii, right? Which is we don't like anybody who isn't Hawaiian. And anybody who isn't Hawaiian is going to get kicked out of the Hawaiian Islands. It's like most of us are not fully Hawaiian. I would not kick my mother out of Hawaii. And most of us are not going to kick out of Hawaii, the people that we grew up with and love, right? And we are all of that, you know, of those people. So that's one of the misunderstandings. The other thing is like, what are you going to do? Go back to being an independent monarchy? It's like, no. So what would we be if we, so it's like, are you going to go back to not having any electricity and pounding poi for your food? It's like, what is wrong with you? That's like just stupid, right? So there is, you know, this racist tendency to think that return to sovereignty is return to how things were 200 years ago. It's like, nobody wants that. Even, especially Hawaiians don't want that, right? So that's the tension, I would say, Emily, is that the fighting among Hawaiians about what sovereignty might and could look like, that our only models are the models of the tribal nations of the Americas in relationship to the United States government. And that we are such a small place, right? And so in some ways, what we would want to do also sets a precedent for what other tribal nations might want to do in the Americas. And the last thing I'll say about sovereignty that is very threatening to the United States is that Hawaii is an occupied military space to maintain the military global dominance of the United States around the world. But definitely on the Asia side, it is a way for the United States to wield power in the Pacific against Asia. And so part of why the United States, I think, will never allow Hawaiians to become sovereign in the way that would give us some self-determination is that they are not willing to give up the control of the Hawaiian Islands that is enforced by the military presence of the United States in Hawaii. We are, I think, the only place on the globe that has such a small land footprint that has every branch of the United States military is in Hawaii. I don't think there's any place else of the 50 states that has the presence of every single branch in such a small little landmass, right? And then they've taken over the most pristine beaches and lands are owned by the military. Now, how is that the military owns the most pristine places in Hawaii, right? And then what do they use them for? Bombing, training runs. It's just filled with contradictions. So that's why sovereignty in the Hawaii context is very, very, very difficult to resolve, because there are too many competing constituencies and stakeholders that have a tremendous influence on us. And the latest attempt to try to define sovereignty under the Obama administration created tremendous tensions in our community because some wanted us to have an independent constitutional convention. But it was also militarized. That process was also militarized. And so many of us were very, 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 very critical of that process. And it had the stamp of the Obama administration on it. So everybody was like, yeah, but Obama administration, they're going to make things better. It's like, no. So I think that's the problem. We're too, we're all tied up in the octopus arms of the United States. And that's about global capitalism, and it's about militarism. Those are the forces that is going to make it very difficult for Hawaiians to ever have sovereignty that allow us full self-determination. And that doesn't mean like we're going to kick people out or, what are we going to do? Like tax the United States? I mean, if we were a sovereign nation, you would have to have a passport to go there, like you have to go to France or Japan or China. But we're not going to kick anybody out. We might charge you a little bit more. We might tax you, but that's never really been a viable option. It just isn't. And part of it is that we cannot extricate ourselves from the United States. I don't think that's going to be possible. So I don't know if that helped. I mean, if anything, it should be more confusing to you, right? And if it is, then that means good. Try to figure out, what shall we do?
Yeah, and to think about how like ongoing and like real all colonialism is in Hawaii. Like it seems so normalized now to have like, all these military bases all over the place. And like it seems normal, but it's not. There's something deeply wrong with them being here. I was just thinking that a couple of weeks ago, it's been stormy here. I asked my sister, I live nearby. I live in Waialua, which is like kind of close to Schofield Barracks, one of the military bases. And they do a lot of trainings, like military trainings and practice fires and like gunfire practice. And it's just insane. And so it was storming. And I asked my sister, I said, hey, was that thunder or was that Schofield bombs? She was like, Schofield. Just so nonchalantly that there was bombs and gunfire going off in our sacred mountains and areas. Just so casually. And you could hear them all over the place. You can hear them when you're at the beach surfing, just trying to enjoy home. So.
And you have to think like, do they do that in other places where there are more white people? They don't. Now we know the military tends to occupy places that are mainly occupied by, mainly lands where there are people of color, but they're not actively bombing and flying training runs with jet fighters. Like every day, and closing off public beaches and public lands because they're going to be like traversing their equipment over it and stuff like that, right? So they don't do stuff like that anyplace else. But in Hawaii, they have the impunity to treat the people and the land in that way. So that's why like sovereignty seems like a very far off aspiration, but sovereignty is in your heart. It really is. Sovereignty is in your heart, in your mind, in your spirit, and that is that we will never be defeated, and we will never go down ever, right? And that we always have to fight. We fight for the generations ahead, for clean water, for clean air, for access to food, for food sovereignty. So to me, if we can have food sovereignty in Hawaii, that will probably be so much better than having legal sovereignty. We have to have access to our own food and clean water and housing for all, right? So there are things that everybody deserves to have, but in a place like Hawaii that has such a small footprint, literally, we deserve those things, and we must have those things. And that's the sovereignty that I will fight for now, more than legal sovereignty.
It looks like we have time for one or two more questions. If anyone has anything they want to talk about or hear about, please do say so. We're wrapping up here in our last 6 minutes. Oh, Mitao, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us. This has been such a treat.
My question that I feel like I'm asking everybody in these past year is, what are the things that are giving you hope right now?
Well, you know, I tend to be hopeful. That's just kind of how I grew up, I think. And I will attribute that always to my grandmother, my Hawaiian grandmother who lived with us, and my mother. I was just very close to them. And I think the best parts of who I am are because of them. And they were always like that, you know, just really funny and positive. And I would say there are a couple of things that I feel hopeful about. One is that we are entering, and sadly, but this is how, you know, social movements happen. It's always about a catalytic moment, right, in history. And I think last summer, unfortunately, the tragedies of Breonna and so many others, and every day, you know, African Americans are being killed by the state in the prison industrial complex and in the streets and in schools, right? And so it's not like something different happened, but I think what happened was the public nature of George Floyd's murder. And I think we're never going to go back to the complacency that we've had about racism. And we are in a moment right now. So if there's any time when we should ask for, we should demand deep change, I think this is it. So I feel hopeful for the outcomes of the tragedies that have befallen everybody around the world, but certainly here in the United States, and certainly in Black communities and in poor communities and immigrant communities. And I meant to open today with a blessing and a healing thought for everyone in Atlanta, for all the families and communities around Atlanta, for the 8 who were murdered there, and for the sadness, the grief, and the deep anger I have about that. I feel like, there you go, let's go, organize, mobilize, let's get some things done. And so that's what I feel hopeful about. I feel hopeful about the energy and the opportunity to live and to practice the aspirations that we've kind of given lip service to. Now we can we don't have any excuse now. Like anybody who says like, oh, well, you know, we've been working for racial justice for a long time. It's like, no, you haven't. And let's do it now, right now, right? So everybody who kind of didn't really talk about it, now everybody's talking about it. So I feel so hopeful about that, right? And then the other thing, in a really odd way, like I just got, you know, I got my vaccinations, my COVID vaccinations a few weeks ago. And a different mindset came to me with that. And of course, I'm still wearing my masks and everything, but I feel like COVID has been a tremendous tragedy around the world and here. And it's also forced us to really think through how it is that we do things, how it is that we provide health and welfare to all of us, right? How we provide food and a living wage to everybody. And so it just was a big shock to our system as a structure, you know? And so I think that COVID has really forced all of us to do things like this, to teach in this way on a screen where all of you are like these little boxes, as I think I am probably too. But you know, some good things have happened with that too, right? So I don't know, there won't be brick and mortar colleges the way they have been. I think we're going to go much more to a venue like this, maybe partially, you know, more of a hybrid kind of thing. But brick and mortar is way too expensive. Students cannot pay for brick and mortar education in higher ed. It's not possible anymore. So I think I feel hopeful about that. Innovations in education, innovations in ways of work. And so I think I feel hopeful for all those things, that we'll be able to maybe really look really finely at food sovereignty, at housing, at access to healthcare, racial justice, freedom. You know, really looking deeply at why it is that we're seeing all the murders of trans BIPOC women. These are things like, now it's time. We're in a moment of tremendous liberation, and that's how I will look at it. With all the tragedy comes tremendous opportunities for growth and liberation, and that's what I'm holding on to.
Thank you so much, Kalei. We are just about time here, but thank you for leaving us on such positive notes in such heavy times and having to find ways of finding peace and ground yourself and be hopeful for things in the future. Big mahalos to everyone who came today and to Dean Yi and Dean M for inviting Kalei in the first place and for honoring me with this moderating position today. So if anyone has any last words to say, I think we're at the ending here.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Mikiala, to Juliana, to all of you for inviting me. And, you know, just hang in there, folks. You have the privilege of being in college right now, of being well enough to have access to stable Wi-Fi that you're able to jump on here from wherever you are. And just know that all of us are blessed with the presence of our ancestors each and every day. And be mindful of that, be accountable to that, and believe. Just keep believing and keep working for justice each and every day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Take care.
Aloha, Mikiala.